So welcome for our rescheduled dates. It's so cold. It's so snowy. Before we get into the videos, I wanted to just share some kind of new learning or a different way of thinking about writing aloud that helped me clear some of my questions up a little bit. I think I've shared with you that writing aloud is has been a really effective intervention in our district, but is underutilized. I think because people don't always understand how it all fits together. And so a couple weeks ago, well, actually almost like a month and a half ago now, I was at the Reading Recovery Comprehensive Literacy Model Conference in Chicago. That's run by National Louis University, and there was a presenter who is a middle school building coach in Illinois, and she presented on how she uses writing aloud and how she's kind of thought about it and how she's made it work for her. So I did share, she revised the planner because as you well know, if you've ever used Dorn's planners in their original format, they are not always put together in a very linear format. So she remade this planner into a vertical planner that follows, much like this comprehension focus group planner that I shared with you, it follows kind of a vertical alignment. So I'll go through very briefly what I learned, and we can have a little conversation about that, and then we'll kind of fold that into the conversation about the videos. So the way the planner works is you have the familiar read and the word work are the first two boxes. And you have actually two versions. This is one that's filled out for a group that her name is Naomi Kozer. She shared this. This is a middle school group that she runs. So I included that just so you could see how she kind of put things together. But the first two boxes are done every day. I actually have this in a slide. I'll go back to these ones. But the first two boxes of familiar reading and word study are done every single lesson for 15 minutes. So 5 minutes for the familiar read and 10 minutes for the word study. You think about your familiar read as being something that your students can go back to time after time to both explore for writing features, so thinking like an author, but then also an opportunity for them to practice and develop fluency. Naomi Kozier, who's the presenter, she suggested for middle school students looking at things like poetry or lyrics to songs, different things like that to keep them engaged. But she also talked about picture books, even excerpts of picture books that could be used as familiar reads. If you're interested, I can certainly share. I do not have an electronic version of her PowerPoint, but I can certainly share some of the information that she put in there. Then you would have a read aloud. So like I said, your familiar read and word studies every day for 15 minutes. That leaves you 15 more minutes in your intervention that you would fill with something else. Either a read aloud, which is a mentor text that you would use to explore writing, crafting techniques, or different skills related to writing, because remember this is a writing intervention. Or you could do your familiar word reading and word study and then do the co-constructed writing that we talked about, which is that modeled writing. Or you could do your familiar reading and word study and then the students are independent writing. So that was the new learning for me. I was struggling with where do you fit in this familiar reading and word study, knowing that many of the students who are in writing aloud typically need a bit more work with conventions and some of the things related to encoding. So I was really struggling with how does that all fit together. This kind of cleared it up. So essentially you take your 30-minute intervention, you split it, half of it is familiar reading and word study, the second half might be read aloud, might be your co-constructed writing, and might be your independent writing. So she talked about that your read aloud would typically take you 1 to 2 days of those 15 minutes. Co-constructed writing and independent writing would take you anywhere from 1 to 10 days, depending on the length of your writing and what kind of writing you're doing. So in the videos that you saw of Susie, she's actually working on a constructed response with her students. So she spends far fewer days doing that than she would if they were writing a narrative, a personal narrative, just because of the length and the amount of editing and revising that goes into that. Questions about that? I will share, this is I think I shared with you, I'm redoing my Writing Aloud training, and so what I have in the beginning of this, I will share this with Katie so that you guys can take a look at it. This is just kind of an overview of what the goals of Writing Aloud are. It's designed to be used for writers who have knowledge of fundamental writing concepts so that they know, like, writing goes left to right, there's spaces between their words, they understand what a letter and a word is, they have some basic spelling skills, and they also have a core bank of high frequency words. That's what we would consider fundamental writing. But they're struggling with that writing process. So organizing their writing, editing, revising, crafting, or even just planning for their writing. So those would be all the things that would be addressed in this particular intervention. And then what we did is we talked about what are the literacy concepts addressed in Writing Aloud, and then what components address those. So fluency is addressed through the familiar reading, decoding and encoding is developed through the word work, your comprehension skills are developed through your read aloud discussion, and then the writing process is through the read aloud where you're examining authors as mentors, your co-constructed writing, independent writing, the conferencing that you would do with students, and then you noticed on the left-hand side, or my left-hand side, is the teaching targets. These are the things, these are options, they're not a menu, it's not a checklist, it's a menu, and it's not, you're not limited to these things. So think about what kinds of things, what are your goals for students? When you're thinking about the word work, what kinds of things do your students need to be able to learn how to do? When you're thinking about the co-constructed writing, what do I want my students to be able to glean from my co-constructed writing, because then I have to teach mini lessons around those, or I have to be sure to model those pieces in my co-constructed writing. Does this help a little bit? Okay, I felt like when I looked, I was like, oh, that's how we're supposed to do it. So it helped clear up some confusion for me. As I finish this redone Writing Aloud training, I will share that, or if we want to look at doing something next year, we certainly can do that. All right, let's talk about the video. So you watched, it was a long time ago that I taped this, so you watched Susie Grabo doing a comprehension focus group. I believe it's with a 5th grade group. When she was doing that group, her focus for them was on their constructed response. So part of our, I think I shared before, part of our unit assessments, at the completion of every unit, students have 4 constructed response comprehension questions that they answer related to the unit's big ideas. She was focusing on one of those, which is a compare and contrast of, they could choose character traits, theme, and something else. I can't remember what the third one was. But, so the list of questions that we had talked about, and we'll just follow the same format that we've used in the past. Sorry, I took a screenshot of the questions so I would remember. The first question, and we'll follow the same format, so we'll talk small group and then share out whole group. So what questions about the videos or lesson structure do you have? And just a reminder, she is doing comprehension focus groups with them, but that was a phase 3, which would replicate what Writing Aloud is, minus the word work. So what questions do you have? You can talk at your table first, or if you have something right off the bat that's a great question. She's not publishing. What? She's not publishing anymore. Oh, I shouldn't say that. She has 3 coming out in the next year.
She had one since Saturday?
She hasn't published it. She hasn't written it, but she hasn't published it.
We didn't.
Okay.
It's one of those things.
Where do we find out about writing Aloud? On our website.
Yeah, and being part of it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really all these pieces, yeah.
So I know she's got,
There was one, right.
Process. This is the first thing.
they have, illustrated example.
That's a different.
So surely we can understand that.
That's a different. The writing samples are different.
And I go way back to really teaching.
Because they were.
You probably took
They
them.
have set standards for just to get them going.
Yeah, and that's a much higher group.
The samples were?
Yeah, than the group that she currently has, or the group that was with her. The author's craft, I know.
It is.
And she reflected,
To that third.
yeah, she reflected on this. If I would have done that, I would have taken and just made them look at, I can't remember what the first one was, but whatever the first one was, because that was even the easiest one for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, let's come back together, because I've only really listened to this tape up here, but they've had some good questions already. I do want to clarify, because of the timing, so we were away at the Illinois conference, and then we were at WSRA for 2 days, and then we had all those snow and cold days in there. So my intent was to actually videotape those students and then get a sample of their writing later on, so you could see how it progressed. I was not able to do that. So what those pictures of the writing sample are actually from a different group that Susie has that's a little further along with the same question. And that group is would be higher than the group that you saw the video of. So there's a little discrepancy when you looked at the writing samples. Those aren't the same kids. Just FYI. All right, so questions you had about the video or structure, or and we can certainly bleed into some of the other questions as you're asking them.
So much questions, but what we noticed was they need a lot of guidance and support, scaffolding of instruction. They're definitely not independent yet, which explains why they're really in this intervention.
Correct. Yep.
Questioning from her, lots of questions to get them thinking.
One of my questions was how many times have they done this, like, how many times did you model this with a mentor text, this specific concept of comparing contrast? Was it just once together where they did it and then they went on to their own?
Yep, this was the first time. In previous cycles of the comprehensive focus group, she had addressed other questions, so this was their first go around at this particular question.
Is there
Yeah, and what Susie and I talked about after the videotaping was she recognized that they were not nearly as independent as she had hoped they would be. They had demonstrated more independence with some of the, so our questions typically are like, the first one is identify main idea and key details. They had been much more independent at that, answering those questions in her writing, or in her phase 3, and so she had kind of predicted that they would do well with that particular question, and realized quickly that that wasn't the case. So a couple of things that she did is she backed off. There were 3 choices, so they were to compare and contrast, and then they had 3 choices of things that they could choose to compare and contrast. When she went back through, she eliminated 2 of those choices and made the one that was most obvious the choice that they had to compare and contrast. I think a couple of the kids did, was it author's craft, or was it? Yeah, I can't remember which one they chose, but it was one of the girls chose something, and while she was videotaping, I was like, no, don't choose that one because it's not going to go well. So she reflected on that was something that she should have gone back. And then the other pieces for a couple of those girls, we decided that a bit more scaffolding was necessary, and so she actually put together some sentence frames for them that they could use to anchor on. So she had more of a kind of a constructed, not fill in the blank, but here's how you're going to start this, here's where you add in your thinking. Here's how you're going to start this sentence, here's where you're going to add in your thinking. They needed that level of scaffolding because giving them a blank piece of paper with a planner wasn't working well for them.
And is that okay to give them more format, more like a visual?
It's not ideal. Obviously, we want our students to have, be able to have a planner and then construct a response, but we know that you can't jump from completely scaffolded model to independence overnight. And so there has to be some steps in between there. So that was one of the steps we built into play. And they were actually able to use that during their unit assessment for the time being until we can scaffold that away for them.
And how long ago, Sarah, was that video? Can you recall?
That would have been January, like middle of
So
January.
recent, so we wouldn't be able to see quite a growth increase yet.
Probably not.
I'm interested to see, just because she was so attuned to them, but they were so dependent on her, just to see what happens in 2 months.
Yeah.
The next assessment.
Yeah, the other thing that Susie reflected on, and this is a great example of, as interventionists, one of the traps that we fall into. So she has 2 5th grade groups. You saw the pictures of one of the groups, and then you saw the video of the other group. That first group is slightly ahead, pacing-wise, from the group that you saw the video of. And so Susie just thought, well, my plan for the writing aloud portion, phase 3, went well for that first group. I'm just going to replicate what I did with them with the second group, because the first group was able to do it with independence. And what Susie said is, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I know enough about these girls to know that they are not at the same level of independence as my earlier group, and so I needed to do something slightly different. So that's also a really great reflection piece, because as interventionists, we can fall into that trap, where especially if you have groups that are at the same grade level with similar needs, it's easy just to say, okay, I'm going to use the same lesson planner with each group, and we know that that's not always the best fit for each group. So it was a great reflection moment for her.
I was curious how like the 2 texts were chosen. So weren't they comparing characters, like 2 different texts? And I was curious, like they seem to be struggling to come up with ideas of how they were similar and different. Like, were the texts in like a theme or a set?
Yeah, so all 3 were her mentor texts, and then the 3 texts that the kids had read were all article. Well, one was the book, that was the mentor text about the boy with the camels. And then the 3 articles that the girls read were about kids who had an impact on the world. So they were all based off an individual child who had an impact on the world. And they all did different things. So there was the girl who is making it her mission to have 10,000 books written about girls of color. There was the girl who invented the invention for testing for lead in water, and then, I can't remember what the third one was. Yeah.
So are those listed under the grade level mentor text? Like you were asking how they pick the text?
I was just curious if, like, as a first initial go at this, if something a little bit more concrete, like, I think that is, like, they are connected, but I don't know if they needed something a little more
Likely.
obvious,
Yeah,
like, just
maybe.
in doing.
I think where Susie's head was at was that so keep in mind that each of those texts the kids had spent a week with, exploring, talking about, writing about. So the assumption on Susie's part, and she said, that's not what happened, was that these girls were well acquainted with these articles. So because she followed the CFG format with the reading before that, and you spend a week with each text. So the girls had spent a week with each article. And so that was eye-opening also when you think about strengths and areas of need. Susie was under the impression that spending a week on these articles, they could go to the depth that she was asking them to, and they weren't able to. In some respects, they weren't even able to give her basic information about the text. And so that was eye-opening, and then she needed to take a couple steps back. Yeah, but you're right, that's a great observation. How about, talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about the support that she was using. So now think about, based off of what you saw, what the students' strengths were, what their next, what kind of supports that Susie may need to adjust to. What might the next step be for these kiddos? And then think about what additional lessons Susie might need to include in order to make them that much more independent or slightly more independent. So talk through that. So what are the next steps, or what lessons might Susie need to include?
I noticed that she wasn't correctly the grammar of the word. But it didn't know if that was mentioned or the last mention.
Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. I didn't see that. Place there.
Yeah.
Yeah, she could take out. Like just a real easy text first to model, have them practice writing it. So I think it was like taking a harder text and doing a harder writing task. So they couldn't, but so if it was easier, I know we're supposed to start them or go with it too. But it may be a little bit easier to be able to do.
It's always cool, which is why I have this stuff.
It wasn't a level of reading, maybe a little bit easier. What do you think, like the third aspect?
So then you thought it was really funny, but then you that was the journal had the words and I'm thinking that they were which right, we don't know the details well enough.
Another thing is I think so paired up those two, you had the conversation talk first, like what are they doing?
Yeah.
Until they connect and sometimes we need help, like I'll even, which of course helps, but we can't assume that they can do it on their own.
Did you like that?
It's painful.
All right. So remember that the value of doing these kinds of things where we share a large group is some of the ideas that you might have. Well, Susie's not here, I will share your ideas with her, but while we're watching videos of students that aren't yours, you very likely may have students who fit or look like these girls in the aspect where they're not taking on things that you thought they would be able to take on, or something that you thought like being able to glean basic information from an article, you thought that was more secure than it is, and now it's not. So think about this, when we share out these strategies, the benefit of doing this is now you get an opportunity to think about different ways that you can reframe things for your own students. So ideas for either strategies or next steps or particular lessons that might benefit these particular students.
We talked about in this group to use easier texts at first, or very familiar texts that they could, because they were asked to do 2 hard tasks, to be able to comprehend harder level texts and then to do writing. And that's, that they struggle with that, so maybe that could be the step prior. Not saying not to do those harder texts, but when they're learning that writing, they could model after some easier texts.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Other strategies or next steps or lessons?
Like they did, I didn't see that, but like we have sometimes with some of my kids when they connect it to their own life, so they find like, let's say this girl invented this, but what did I do to contribute? Maybe that in their way they'll feel more comfortable talking.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
Venn diagram or something, or they do as a group, or maybe there's something they might know.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, or even taking an idea of a topic that's more familiar to them and a topic that's less familiar, so they're only having to control new learning in one topic. Mhm. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Other suggestions, strategies, next steps?
Kathy and I were talking about even maybe the need to back up and reteach some of those text structures. Something that they probably had in the class at grade level prior. But I mean, that takes away then the program, but yet then it would allow them to go deeper than they're supposed to, because they were not independent. I felt that was just,
Yeah.
but but then that's so much scaffolding. But then would she be able to back away a little bit if she retaught each instruction?
Talk a little bit more about what you mean with text structure.
Well, no, I'm just saying the compare and contrast,
Yep.
or, the different focus points and how she was trying to get them to use constructive response. It was just maybe teaching the how before the what. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I wonder too if they were using these texts, even if she had like on little Post-its, like the different ideas, and they place them within the double bubbles so that they're not generating the ideas, but then they're looking for where they would fit. Are we comparing to the similarity or to the difference?
Yeah, that goes along with when you think about the complexity of the task. So if you're asking a student to have engage in a very complex task, then the complexity of the text needs to be easier. If you're going to increase the complexity of the text, then you need to find some way to decrease the complexity of the task. You can't have 2 very complex tasks and text and expect students to go to the depth that we were hoping that these girls would go to. So that's, yeah, a great suggestion. Other thoughts?
We talked about possibly using some visuals that we could put into the notebook. So first time around, do a complete modeling as a teacher of how that would look, very interesting. Picture of it, printed, and then next day do more of a great format, provide the starters, they help us fill in, and construct it, make sure to put it in the journal stuff, and 2 examples to provide to you the third time. That's an enjoy your own.
Yep.
Like, so in this case, when we see that things are not going the way we want it to go, so can we just then still say successful we are teaching them at least structure? Because what I see is that, especially as they get older, they struggle with structure, how to develop an introductory paragraph, they're going to, so even if they're, even if we have to scaffold more than we wanted at first, we can still, if they learn how to develop essays, and yet we can still say with the sentence starters and all of that, that we made some success,
Yep.
especially this initial phase.
Yeah. The other thing along with those lines that we talked about is understanding the difference between students who have the comprehension. So in this case, they have the skill of being able to compare and contrast and or identify whichever parts they were looking for. Or are they having difficulty with putting it into a constructed response? Because if the difficulty is around the comprehension, then maybe having them move it directly to a constructed response isn't the best move. So you could do some things along the lines of, instead of having them develop a constructed response, maybe some of the information is already given to them like you had suggested, and then they're going to transfer that information into a more formalized narrative writing. Or we maybe don't take it all the way to a constructed response. Maybe we're only going to develop the organizer for it right now so that we can understand how all that thinking is organized, and then the next time we'll do it again and then we'll add the constructed response. So always balancing that idea of, is the writing what's getting in the way of their comprehension, or is it that the comprehension isn't even there yet? And so we have to develop that before we can ask them to write about it. The other piece that I had reflected on, and I think I heard somebody say it, but we know that sometimes talking about things can help kids weed through all of the extraneous information that they have in their head. So giving those girls an opportunity to talk out their plan for writing might have been beneficial for them also. Before they all of a sudden have all these texts in front of them and all these ideas, and they're going to try and organize it. So maybe talking through it with a partner, or even just talking through it with Susie herself, so that she had an idea of where they might go awry. The other thing I suggested, and this is always good information, so we are one-to-one in classrooms with Chromebooks, and one of the things I thought might have been a sticking point for them was clicking between the different articles. So some of the girls were using the book and then they had an article, but then some of the girls had 2 articles and they were trying to navigate between the 2 articles on the Chromebook. And while we want to give students the opportunity to read on a Chromebook, because that's something that they're being exposed to more and more and they're being required of more and more, it might have been easier management-wise for the girls to have one paper copy and then one copy on the screen, so that they could quickly go back and forth between the 2, or even more carefully put them side by side, or even 2 paper copies so that they could put them side by side. That might have been more helpful than closing down one article, opening the other article, and those kinds of things. So that's something else that I had asked her to reflect on and think about. Just knowing that we know that for some children, comprehension goes down when you're reading on a screen, and so because they can't physically write or highlight or annotate things like that, so how are we going to accommodate that and make sure that they have opportunities to do both? Any other thoughts, strategies? All right, so at your table, talk a little bit about what's something that you heard today, or even if you didn't hear it, you just all of a sudden thought about it, that you think might be helpful for you with one of your groups, or in work with students that you might work with in a classroom, or even working with a teacher. So something that you heard or learned today that might be helpful to you as you go forth tomorrow.
I'm gonna go this way because some of them are very quiet.
They are.
So we'll do it this way.
No, but I put it right on the wall. I know.
That's true.
But see, that's interactive writing for K3. I don't think this is applicable for, and this is freaking out with it, because we don't have the K3.
I can scan it, otherwise if I can't find it in the PDF format, I can scan it.
But she said, I have three, but I think they're all same thing. Ah. The fifth grade? Yeah, yeah. Well, I wonder.
That's what I was thinking, just add it over. Yep.
Well, that's the thing. It depends on the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Looking at a screen, I can try to take
You know what? She was for my What about our
Yeah, Mark, the next 3 Fridays. Personally, so my daughter has
We're working on them with dates
is coming
for
from, my sister's in Texas next Friday.
you feel any good week, good week.
But in April, absolutely.
Because you gave her your books. Those were all A's? They should have been A's. I mean, her, she's a
It does. Yes. And it's a visual. Yeah, there.
All right, let's just do a quick, share something that you heard today or you thought of today that would be helpful for you in your work with students or teachers. So we'll start with you in the middle.
Just having, not expecting too much new at one time, and maybe having different layers of scaffolding kind of prepared in your mind ahead of time of how you could do it.
Yep. We'll go this way.
Oh, I was just saying, having more conversation. Sometimes I think I'm rushed to get the pen to the paper, and it was nice to see the level of conversation so that I'm not thinking, we're not writing if we're not writing. No, we're preparing for writing, we're planning for writing, we're doing all of those thoughts.
Yep. Yeah, that talk is really important, both for comprehension and for organizing your thoughts. It's really important.
So I like what Katie said, and I like your planner that you shared with us, and because it helps me when I work with my L's to see where they are and how to just support, because it's really nicely like where they start and where to take them.
Awesome.
I'll post that to our website.
Not new learning, but a reminder of the importance of the foundation, taking your time with that, putting those pieces in place to lead to that independence.
I got an idea here from taking pictures of the charts that you do and printing them out and putting them in the book so that the kids have a visual representation and they can refer back to it. I think that was a great idea.
Yes, absolutely.
I love Katie's idea of just getting, they weren't quite at the level to jump right into the writing, but taking those the Post-its and just having the pre-generated ideas and seeing if they can even sort and organize them in a
Yes.
compare and contrast format.
Just seeing the importance of that it's not just a writing intervention, but they need the reading practice too. It's a reciprocal process, the reading, support, and then the writing.
I was gonna say, I like the planner. That'll be helpful.
Good.
I like the planner too, as well as wondering about, is there some type of systematic defined for that?
Say that
To
again.
to follow, because like I said, this is K3, so as we ask more about the scaffolding and when you release more, where can we find more information about that?
So unfortunately, Dorn had a 4 or 3, was that up to 3rd grade in that one?
K3, yep.
Yeah, she had a 4-8 book all ready to be published, and for whatever reason decided not to take it to publication. It was kind of on the docket to be published for about 2 years, and then we got information from her that she wasn't planning on publishing it. She was going to reserve some of the work that in changing the interventions for those districts and those universities that had connected with her through the PCL. Now, I'm not sure what the next steps will be, so the latest that we've heard from her is that she is retiring at the end of this year. Her health is not good, and so she will be closing the PCL site or center at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. There are other sites and centers across the nation that will continue the work, but she's not really retiring because her and Carla Safos have 3 books that they're publishing in the next 2 years. She's going to be increasing her speaking scheduling and things like that. So we're not done hearing from her yet, I don't think, but she is closing this center at the university. Primarily what she shared is she doesn't want to deal with all of the university politics and hoops that she has to jump through. So she wants to take this and make it her own. So I would anticipate, in answer to your question, you may see something in the next 2 years around that. She has some, I can't remember the exact titles, she did share them with us, but one of them is an upper grade book. So my hope would be that yes, we would see something like that. Unfortunately, right now, the way that we've learned about it with upper grades is by watching the nationwide videos and lessons.
So we just contact you, right, with questions?
Yeah, I don't have, and because she's been out sick this year, we haven't done a whole lot of watching of the intervention videos. In fact, she's had more speakers come in. So we had, I shared with you guys, we had Jeff Anderson, author of Patterns of Power with grammar. He was in last month, and then coming up is Wiley Blevins, who really focuses on phonics and word study. So we haven't done a lot of looking at interventions and watching videos just because Linda's been out sick. And so it's been a little bit of a different structure this year. I'm still waiting to hear what the structure will be for next year. So I am hopeful that more information will come out that's beneficial to the general public in the next few years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Sarah and I are going to get together and likely with the reading specialist to talk about what do we do continuing. I think these sessions have been particularly powerful. And so we will do something in the future. I don't know exactly what that will look like, as well as discussing the need, if we need to start anybody from ground zero, if we need a new cohort. Don't know about that either. We'll just have to see what our needs are this spring and then figure out what that looks like. So to be determined.
Thank you for recording and posting on the website. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yes. And just remind anybody else, if you've got people who are new or need background or refreshers, everything is posted to our CIM site on the individual pages. They just have to scroll down to find the videos as well as any of the recordings and handouts. The other thing that we would like to do next year is to analyze our own videos, not Menominee Falls. So,
That's powerful.
yep, so reading specialists, I would ask you to start looking, especially this spring, if you can get into any of your classrooms and you have to get over the whole, you know, I look weird or my hair is funny or I sound weird, and, you know, you watch it a couple times and you get over all that and then you get into the actual content of it. So I ask you to be brave and to be willing to be videoed, because it helps not only you, it helps everybody. So please think about that this spring already. Let's get on it, and we'll go from there.
Kathy, you in? No fashion.
Awesome.